Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wrestler's Way official podcast. I'm your host, the Kansas Kid, professional blogger at wrestlersway.blogspot.com, the one place to discuss professional wrestling since your wife doesn't want to hear it, your coworkers will think you're weird, and your friends think you just haven't grown up yet. Now, recently I was watching the nWo Legends Roundtable on WWE Classics On Demand, and they had Michael Hayes and Jim Ross, J.J. Dillon, Mean Gene Okerlund, and Big Sexy Kevin Nash on there. And they were discussing the nWo, of course. And I was kind of confused as to why Michael Hayes and Jim Ross were there, since they weren't even a part of WCW at that time during the whole nWo angle. And so I was like, okay, whatever. I guess you can get some good perspectives of what the competition was thinking. So all in all, wasn't a big deal. So the one thing, though, that kind of bugged me about the whole thing was Kevin Nash, because I feel like when it came to anything about WCW's demise or whatnot, he won't admit fault for anything that went wrong at WCW. And now I know he's just one wrestler and stuff, one guy. He can't accept blame for everything. He didn't do everything. There's tons of guys working for that company. But he contributed to the problem. He even admitted it during the nWo Legends Roundtable discussion. He admitted things he did, like shady, underhanded things he did, and how he duped WCW out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yet at the same time, but he won't go as far to actually admit fault for WCW's downfall. So, and I'm here to explain to you guys a few things that Nash talked about, how he duped WCW out of all this money and stuff. Well, anyway, so back at the time, before he went to WCW, of course, we all know he was Diesel, along with his buddy Razor Ramon. He was part of the clique with HBK and Triple H and X-Pac, Sean Waltman, and at the time, 1-2-3 Kid. But he was working for Vince McMahon, and Scott Hall had been talking to WCW. His contract was coming up soon, and they were offering him some pretty big money. And there was a term at the time, and it was called Sting money. And that was because Sting was making $750,000 a year, and as far as financially, Sting was pretty much the gold standard of how high you could go in the company. And Hall told Nash, apparently, because Nash's contract was coming up too. Both Hall and Nash's contracts were coming up, and Hall told Nash, hey, these guys are offering me 3 times the money. They're offering big money. And he was like, Nash said, how much money? And he, Hall was like, Sting money, over Sting money. And, he said he also got a favored nations, because he'd been talking to him, and they were offering a favored nations and stuff, and which a favored nations, to those of you who don't know, basically means that anyone who comes in the company after you and say they come in making more money, or they renegotiate another wrestler's contract for more money and they're making more than you, you automatically get bumped up to whatever that guy is making. So if you're making $500,000 a year and they bring in, Joe Blow, and he's making $700,000 after you, you automatically get bumped up to $700,000. So that's a big deal. And, so of course, Nash was like, and Hall, they're like, we got to take this money. And, Nash said it was a hard decision for him, which I believe him. Nash is real big about working the camera and stuff. He's an actor, but I do believe that much, because WWF's like a family and whatnot. But, he had to provide for his family at home. So he went ahead and took the money and went over there. And, of course, when he got there, we all know that began the hostile takeover angle, where Scott Hall jumped the guardrail at Nitro, and they thought he was a WWF guy. Like, what's he doing here, So he comes in the ring, you don't know why I'm here, but you all know who I am. So it was a big classic moment. And they also, both of them actually, they were working on deal memos, which a deal memo is something they signed, and a deal memo is kind of an outline of what will be later become the hard contract. It's like an outline. It doesn't have all the specifics, but, they agreed to a deal memo and signed that, and we're working on that. And with the deal memos, though, they had a pull-out option in those contracts that allowed them, if they're, they decide, hey, we don't want to do this, we can pull out of the contract and do whatever we want to do, whether it be go back to WWF or just be unemployed or whatever it is, So, WWF sees Hall jump the guardrail, and they hear him using the Cuban accent and, the toothpicks and, the hair, the Razor Ramon hair, and they're like, man, he's doing the Razor Ramon gimmick, and basically he's, infringing on us. So they, on Raw, they turned around and they started advertising Razor Ramon and Diesel, which didn't make any sense because Diesel and Ramon, Hall and Nash are in WCW now. So WCW heard that WWF was going to have Diesel and Ramon come out, and they thought that Hall and Nash were screwing them over using the pullout option. Basically just went in their company, worked a few weeks, and screwed their company up, and we're going to go back to the WWF. So they were like, man, so they're trying to go back to WWF, so we're just going to offer them more money. So they offered Kevin Nash $400,000 more to go ahead and sign a hard contract and extend his contract from 3 years to 5 years. And Nash, knowing full well he was not going back to the WWF, he had no intention of it, he went ahead and basically was like, well, okay, so he signs it. So then when Raw comes around and Jim Ross introduces Diesel and Razor Ramon, and they turn out to be basically imposters, just like some other actors playing the characters of Razor Ramon and Diesel, but it wasn't Hall and Nash. So the WCW brass are looking at these fake Diesel and this fake Ramon, and then sitting there looking at Nash and Hall, and realizing they just got duped out of basically $800,000 more for the both of them, So they basically just paid to sign those two twice, basically. So, Nash right off the bat and Hall costed WCW an additional $800,000. Now you can look at it two ways: either Nash and Hall duped WCW, or WCW was so dumb they didn't investigate the situation to realize that it was just some fake imposters. And but whatever. And Nash was also saying later on that in WCW, they didn't really have the same merchandising and licensees that WWE had. So when you work for WWF, you get a full-page printout of all the merchandise you sell and your royalty, and at the end of the last page, you get your fat paycheck. So in WCW, you didn't have that. So Nash used that as leverage to tell the WCW brass, basically, hey, I'm getting gypped here, I'm not getting no merchandise sales like I was in WWF. So then they throw him like $400,000 or $500,000 more just to get him to shut up, basically. So later on in the show, he went on and they brought up the finger poke of doom, which was an angle back in '99 where right after Goldberg's streak was ended by Kevin Nash on Nitro, the following Nitro, they had Nash versus Hogan for the world title, and at the time it was nWo Hollywood versus nWo Wolfpack, so it was something everybody was wanting to see. But when the match took place, all Hulk Hogan did was poke Kevin Nash in the chest, and Nash fell down and Hogan pinned him. And, fans were throwing trash in the ring. It's one of the most criticized angles ever and a lot of people see that as the beginning of the end for WCW as a company. So, regarding that, this is another thing that really kind of ticked me off about Kevin Nash. He basically blamed the finger poke of doom's failure on Goldberg, because they brought up how Goldberg wrote a book about, and in the book, I guess his little biography, his book, he was saying that, he just found it funny that, a week or two after Kevin Nash got promoted to head booker of WCW, Kevin Nash beats Goldberg's streak. He books himself to beat Goldberg's streak, which Kevin Nash, denies to this day. But basically, the finger poke of doom anyway, to continue, Kevin Nash was basically saying that they were doing that to combine the Wolfpack and NWO Hollywood back together because they knew Goldberg was the man and he needed a heel machine to go against because he'd already kind of mowed through the roster. So he needed an even stronger force of heels, you know. So they were combining the NWOs. So there was a scene in, I believe they said in Maryland shortly after that, where, Goldberg's chasing the NWO out of the arena. He's chasing Bret Hart. Bret Hart drops a baseball bat. Goldberg's supposed to pick it up, and when they get outside the arena, Bret Hart's supposed to get in a limousine, and Goldberg's supposed to take the baseball bat and smash the windows out on the limousine. But he kind of makes fun of Goldberg because he says Goldberg was like, no, I don't need to use a bat. I'll just punch the windows out with my hand. And so Goldberg punched the windows out, and he severed a lot of arteries in his arm and ended up being out of action for 9 months. And so Nash is like, so we built up this heel machine for Goldberg, and then he got himself hurt, and so we didn't have a babyface to take out all these heels. And I just thought that was a crock of bull because, you could have reheated up Sting. Sting spent a whole year trying to take out the NWO. And, or you could have took Diamond Dallas Page and pushed him to the moon. He was at basically the high point of his career. And, you could have pushed him to the moon and back. He could have been the next guy in line. But, whatever. So I thought it was just kind of a weak cop-out to sit there and blame Goldberg for the finger poke of doom and that whole thing, being criticized and not working because Goldberg got hurt. It was just really shady, and I thought it was really weak. So, between Nash duping WCW out of hundreds of thousands of dollars and then being so self-centered as to blame Goldberg for a really pathetic story arc that didn't work, because I just don't understand it. Nash is someone who, he's a smart guy. I really respect Kevin Nash, but I just thought that was just a bunch of bull. Like, he'll admit and chuckle about duping WCW out of all this money and all this, but he won't admit fault for anything that goes wrong in WCW, and that's what chived me about the NWO Legends Roundtable discussion. But that's all for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and go to wrestlersway.blogspot.com and check out the new blog post every now and then. And thanks for stopping by.